Okay, ನಮ್ದು preparation ಅದು.
Okay. Started the recording. You can start the class.
Okay. Hello, good evening, everyone. I think we will start the second part of the cornea today. I think again it's a very lengthy class. Anyhow, nevertheless, I think we can't help it. We need to complete the syllabus. To begin with, I think we have in the last class we covered the bacterial infections followed by herpetic keratitis, that is a herpes simplex keratitis. Today we will cover the herpes zoster ophthalmicus. Herpes zoster ophthalmicus is basically caused by the varicella zoster virus. The same virus causes the chickenpox in childhood or in youth. This virus resides in the Gazarian ganglion or the trigeminal ganglion. Whenever there is a low cellular immunity, these viruses get activated and they will cause the herpes zoster ophthalmicus. Okay, and to begin with, most commonly it's almost 100%. It's a supraorbital, and the supratrochlear and this infratrochlear nerves are involved. Followed by, most commonly, that is followed by is a nasal branch, that is the nasociliary nerve, which is involved. Whenever there is involvement of the nasociliary nerve, that causes the corneal involvement. Okay, and we have rarely, sometimes we don't see, but you should know, rarely it's a infraorbital nerve which is not involved, and it's usually it's a unilateral. It follows the what you call the unilateral side. It follows the midline what you call the structure. Normally, if it is a bilateral, you have to think of something known as an immunocompromised status. Okay, so these are the different clinical presentation of a herpes zoster ophthalmicus. In the first picture, you can make out there is a corneal involvement. There are nummular keratitis. You can make out there are superficial keratitis, or it can present as a pseudo-dendritic lesions. We know that true dendritic lesions are seen in herpes simplex keratitis. In the case of herpes zoster, we see something known as a pseudo-dendritic keratitis. What is pseudo-dendritic keratitis? You have a what you call the branching pattern of the keratitis, but end doesn't have a what you call the knob or a beaded appearance. We don't see in a herpes zoster ophthalmicus. This is a picture you can make out here. There is an infratrochlear nerve involvement because there is something known as the Hutchinson's rule. Okay, in a Hutchinson's rule, there will be involvement of the nasociliary nerve that results in the involvement of the tip of the nose and also the ocular involvement. Okay. What are the symptoms of herpes zoster ophthalmicus? To begin with, they will have a fever followed by malaise, and they will have a severe neuralgic pain, and skin will become red and edematous. That is followed by there will be vesicular eruptions. These eruptions will become what you call suppurated, and they will bleed and they will form a pitted scars. Okay, and the involved dermatome will become anesthetic. So as we discussed earlier, what is Hutchinson's rules? There will be involvement of the nasociliary branch. Whenever there is a nasociliary branch involvement, which supplies the what you call the eyeball and also the tip of the nose, will be manifested. So what are the signs? Signs we already discussed. These are the what you call you will have you have a different manifestations like corneal involvement, then you have a cranial nerve involvement, retinal involvement, then optic nerve involvement. Okay, in the cornea, the most common presentations from top to bottom, this is according to the most common to the least common ones. Most common ones are they will have a subepithelial punctate keratitis, then they will have a nummular keratitis, they will have a sclerosing keratitis. This is little bit rare or least common type. Then you have what you call the anterior segment involvement, where there will be iridocyclitis and there will be a sectoral keratitis. This question was asked in one of the quiz at a national level conference. Okay, this is actually very important. You have to remember this sectoral iris atrophy. Okay, then there will be scleral nodule formation. You can have elevated intraocular pressure or decreased intraocular pressure. decreased intraocular pressures. Then you have something known as a cranial nerve involvement. These are all the complications. See, normally you see there will be a corneal involvement, but the retinal involvement, cranial nerve involvement, or a optic nerve involvement, these are all the complications. Cranial nerves paresis, we will see the most common to be involved is a third nerve, that is followed by 6th and 7th. Okay, the least one to be affected is a 4th one. Okay, that you have to remember. Third is the most common one, and the least common one is a 4th nerve. Okay. Retina, what will happen? Just like skin, you will have a necrosis of the retina. That is a acute retinal necrosis. Okay, very easy to remember. Similarly, whenever the optic nerve is involved, you will have what you call the inflammation of the optic nerve, that is a optic neuritis. Okay, how do you treat these conditions? To begin with, whenever there is a corneal involvement, treatment is very simple. You start with the antiviral eye drops and antibiotic eye drops to what you call to cover the secondary infections. Similarly, you start the patient on steroids, okay, and lubricating eye drops to reduce, minimize the ocular irritation. Cycloplegics whenever there is an anti segment in you along with the same medication, you need to start the patient, right? Because the patient will have a very severe pain. You need to start the patient either on NSAIDs. If it is not subsiding with the NSAID, simple non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, then you can start the patient on opioid and analgesics. Okay. Whenever there is retinal involvement, you have to again the same medication. Okay. Along with this, you need to start the patient on IV steroids. Okay. Similarly, for an optic nerve involvement, you need to start the patient on IV steroids. Okay, methylprednisolone. So let's solve some of the questions. This question was asked in 2003 PJ. Herpes zoster ophthalmicus is predictor of. Options are leukemia, lymphoma, HIV, disseminated TB, and metastasis. What is your answer? Anybody?
HIV, sir.
Okay. Who else? See, this is a PJ question. Okay, that you have to keep it in mind. Sometimes there will be multiple answers, sometimes may not be. Okay. See, I told you right in the beginning, if you remember this slide. Okay. You see here, I mentioned whenever there is a depressed cellular immunity. Okay. So, this question you can make out here. See, all the conditions you have something known as a deranged cellular immunity. Okay. So leukemia, you take leukemia, lymphoma, HIV, or disseminated TB again, or metastasis. All 5 conditions you will have a deranged cellular immunity. Okay. In all the conditions you will find there is a possibility that the patient might develop herpes zoster ophthalmicus. Okay. So therefore the answers are all the 5, A to 5, A to E. Next question. A 56-year-old man has a painful weeping rashes over the upper eyelid, forehead for the last 2 days. Okay. Along with ipsilateral acute punctate keratopathy. About a year back, he had a chemotherapy for the non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. There is no other abnormality. Which one of the following is most likely diagnosis? Okay. Here you should know how to rule out. For example, if you take impetigo. Impetigo is very common in less than 5 years of age. Okay. So, look at the age of the patient. It's 56 years. So, that is ruled out. Apart from that, impetigo, you will see what you call the ulcers around the nose and also along the mouth. Around the nose and the mouth, you will see the ulcer. And you don't see any lesions, crusting lesions around the eyeball. Okay, so that is ruled out. The second option is SLE. Again, SLE within acute involvement and eye involvement, especially the corneal involvement, is very rare. Okay, that you have to keep it in mind. Then you have a pyoderma gangrenosum. Just for time being, this pyoderma gangrenosum, again, this involves only the extremities. Okay? And it's basically because of unknown reasons. And normally you see it's a dark colored gangrene which occurs on the extremities. So the only option which fit into this criteria is herpes zoster ophthalmicus. Okay? Any doubt?
No, sir.
Okay. This question was asked in 2011 AIMS. All the following occur in herpes zoster ophthalmicus except, okay? The options are anterior stromal keratitis, pseudodendritic keratitis, sclerokeratitis, and endothelitis. What is the answer? Anybody? I told you, right? See, you go from here. Very simple. Suppose this is the eyeball. See, the cornea is involved. The most commonly, the cornea will be involved. Okay. This is the sclera. Okay. Sclerokeratitis are rare. Okay. This is a rare. But again, endothelitis, because of what you call the anterior uveitis, is also very common presentation of a herpes zoster ophthalmicus. So the only option is sclerokeratitis. Okay. I will show you the slide once again. If you look at this, okay, I told you, right? Sclerosing keratitis, this is a rare presentation. Scleral nodules, this is also one of the rare presentations. Okay, the most common ones are which present in a cornea proper. If you look into this, punctate keratitis, nuvular keratitis, these are all the presentations. Or they can have iridocyclitis or a sectoral iris atrophy. Okay. Glaucoma, scleral involvement, these are all the rare manifestations. Ocular symptom not seen in a herpes zoster is, options are, this was asked in All India 2001, a little bit old question. Okay, anyhow we can just, you should know. Nuvular keratitis, glaucoma, uveitis and a cranial nerve palsy.
Glaucoma.
Roshan.
Yes, sir.
Yes. Roshan, listen here. See, I told you, right? Nuvular keratitis, it's a common presentation. Okay.
Yes.
See, the question is very simple. What are the ocular symptoms? Okay. So the glaucoma again is an ocular problem. Uveitis again it's a ocular problem. But look at this cranial. This is a complication. Okay. This is basically a complication. I told you, right? Retinal involvement, optic nerve involvement, or a cranial nerve palsy. These are all the complications. You don't see very regularly. These are very, very rare. Okay. But ocular, what you call the involvement, is very common. So the option here is D, the cranial nerve palsies. Okay. Any doubt?
Okay. Okay, sir.
If you have any doubt, let me know. I told you, right? See, in a herpes zoster ophthalmicus, you can have IOP, either it will be elevated or it can be decreased also. Okay, but both the complications can occur, but you should know.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so with this, we complete the herpes zoster ophthalmicus. Coming to the next infectious keratitis, that is the acanthamoeba keratitis. Okay, acanthamoeba is basically a protozoa. So normally, what are the risk factors for acanthamoeba keratitis? One is this contact virus and swimming and bathing in a what you call contaminated water. And you have what are the symptoms? Usually either the unilateral or bilateral. Most commonly it's a unilateral. Okay. Normally they will have a very severe pain. Why? Because these what you call the organisms spread along the corneal nerves. Okay. So that is very important. Why? They will have a very severe pain in comparison to any other infectious keratitis. Then what are the signs? What are the signs? When you look into the cornea, you will have a ring infiltration. Okay, last time we discussed what are the
Ring ulcer.
ring ulcer. Okay, you will have a ring ulcer and you will have a dendritic form. Though it's not a true dendritic form, it's a pseudodendritic ulcer. Okay, pseudodendritic keratitis. So how do you treat these cases? What you call the treatment of choice. Here is this is the treatment of choice. The first line of drug is polyhexamethylene biguanides. Okay, biguanides. If you want to remember, it's a biguanides or a biguanides. Okay. Then you have a second line of treatment, that is a propamidine. Okay, this is the order. First is a PHLB, that is followed by a propamidine isothianate. Okay, third will be your chlorhexidine. Along with this, because the patient will have a very severe pain, to minimize the what you call the further damage to the eyeball, you need to start the patient on oral medication, which includes a ketoconazole and itraconazole. Okay, these are the only two tablets which is given in a case of acanthamoeba keratitis. Okay, ketoconazole or itraconazole. And topical medication, the line of treatment, the first line of medication is a PHLB, polyhexamethylene biguanides, followed by a propamidine isothianate. Then it's a chlorhexidine. Let's solve some questions. A 25-year-old male patient presented with red eye, complaint of pain, photophobia, watering, and blurring of vision. Okay. He gives a history of trauma with a vegetative matter, that is very important. Corneal examination shows a dendritic ulcer. Corneal scraping was taken and examined. Microscopy showed macrophages, live cells, on culturing and a corneal scraping over the non-nutrient agar induced with E. coli. There were a plaque formation. Which organism is most likely diagnosis? Okay. Last time we discussed what are the culture medias for a different organisms. For the bacteria, we use blood agar, nutrient agar, or thioglycolate agar. Okay, if you remember.
Yes, sir.
Next, for the fungus, we use Seborrhoeic dextrose agar. Okay. Then we have for the acanthamoeba, what is the media used for growing the acanthamoeba? Okay, you have to remember non-nutrient agar induced with E. coli. I will show you. Okay, here. So the bacteria, blood agar, chocolate agar, or thioglycolate agar. For the acanthamoeba, this is very specific. You have to remember. Okay, non-nutrient agar with Escherichia coli overlay. Why E. coli is used? Basically, in a non-nutrient agar, if you put the E. coli, the trophozoites or the amoeba will eat the E. coli. Okay. So these E. coli can be, you can trace the track on the culture media, where it has taken the bacteria and trace. So in that way, you can make out it's an acanthamoeba or not. Similarly, for the fungi, Seborrhoeic dextrose agar without chlorhexidine. This also you have to keep it in mind. This is very important. So herpes simplex, how do you grow herpes simplex? What is the culture media for herpes simplex? Either we use PCR method. Okay. So the herpes simplex, other method is, what is? Zank smear. Anybody? For the herpes simplex, we look for the Cowdery bodies, Cowdery type A bodies. Okay. Then for the Candida, we use Seborrhoeic dextrose agar. Okay. And adenovirus again based on the PCR. But for the acanthamoeba, we use non-nutrient agar induced with the E. coli. And it has a dendritic type of ulcer. It's not a true dendritic, but it's a pseudodendritic ulcer. And it shows the macrophages. Next question. This was asked in 2002 AIMS. 17-year-old girl with a keratitis and a severe pain in the eye came to hospital and the acanthamoeba keratitis was suspected. Patient gave the history of the following 4 points. Out of these, which is not a risk factor for the acanthamoeba keratitis? Who will answer? 1. The first option is extended wear of a contact lens. Definitely one of the
It's definitely more risk factor, sir.
Yes. And you have an exposure to dirty water. That is also one of the risk factors above mentioned. You have a trauma, corneal trauma.
Yes, sir.
Downfall, squamous
blepharitis.
Okay, so the answer is squamous blepharitis. Very good. See, if you look into the life cycle of a what you call the acanthamoeba keratitis, normally it will be in the water. Okay, the life cycle will be completed in the water, but sometimes accidentally that this organism infects the humans. Cycle has only two parts. One, you have something known as a pear-shaped flagellated cyst that will give rise to irregular amoeboid acanthamoeba. Okay, this will complete the cycle, but accidentally it can infect the humans and it can gain entry through cornea, skin, that is through the trauma, then through the lungs, okay, in a swimming pool. So the corneal trauma, yes, absolutely, not through the squamous blepharitis. That is not a risk factor for the acanthamoeba keratitis. Which of the following statement is true regarding the acanthamoeba keratitis? For option A, for the isolation of causative agent, corneal scraping should be cultured on a nutrient agar plate. The second option, a causative agent, acanthamoeba, is a helminth whose normal habitat is soil. Keratitis due to acanthamoeba is not seen in immunocompromised hosts. Fourth option, acanthamoeba does not depend on humans host for the completion of its life cycle. What is the option? What is the right answer? Just now we discussed, the option is D. Okay? Any doubts?
No, sir.
Okay. The next question. A patient using a contact lens develops corneal infection. Lab diagnosis of acanthamoeba keratitis was established. Following is the best drug of treatment. What is the drug of treatment here?
Polyhexamethylene
Polymethylene.
Yeah. Okay, PHMB. You have to remember. Okay. That is the drug of choice. That is followed by propamidine, isothianate. Okay. Ketoconazole is an oral medication. More superior than oral medication, always in ophthalmology you should use topical eye drops. When you option like this, where 3 options are correct: propamidine, ketoconazole, and also PHMB. All 3 are correct, but you should know which one is most important. A regular contact lens user presents with complaints of severe pain, redness, photophobia, and blurred vision for more than 2 weeks. Not responding to the standard treatment. On examination, paracentral ring-shaped lesion with stromal infiltrates, overlaying epithelial defect is observed in the affected eye. Which of the following is the most likely diagnosis or commonest cause of keratitis in a soft contact lens user? What is your answer here?
Acanthamoeba keratitis.
Yeah. How do you rule out other things? See, I have underlined, right?
Past is contact lens.
Fungal
Contact lens
keratitis.
user.
Fungal keratitis.
Is vegetative matter, sir, mainly.
Absolutely. Very good. Excellent. And also, if you look at the lesion, it has a what you call the dry looking hyphated margins. It has a hyphated margin, and
Finger-like
you have a satellite lesions. Okay.
finger-like projection, sir.
Yes, and also you have something known as hypopyon.
Yes, sir.
That is very important. Viral keratitis, you know, it will have either geographic ulcer or
Dendritic ulcer,
dendritic ulcers.
epithelial keratitis.
How does a bacterial ulcer look? It will have a well demarcated margins that will be covered by the what you call the slough.
Yes, sir.
And they can have a what you call hypopyon. So the only option, and based on the history, because 2 weeks, what do you mean by 2 weeks? That means it has an indolent course. That means it has been misdiagnosed. Okay, that is also very important. So if you look at the bacterial, that means suppose if you take a bacterial infection, if you give antibiotics, it will whatever it's a what you call the preventive treatment. When you give the preventive treatment, definitely it will respond. Bacterial ulcers. But it's more than 2 weeks, it's suggestive of academia keratitis. So that ends the what you call the infectious keratitis. Now we move to immune-mediated diseases of the cornea. There are the 4 important that is frequently asked in the exams. So we'll concentrate only on the 4 immune-mediated corneal disorders. So we have 4. The first one is fluctular keratitis. You have acne rosacea. Then you have a marginal ulcer or catarrhal ulcer. Then you have a Murren's ulcers or a chronic serpiginous ulcer, also known as a rodent ulcer. Okay, you should know this. So in the last class we have discussed fluctular keratitis mainly because of its allergic reaction to a tubercular protein. Whenever we see in the cases of especially those who have what you call the fluctular conjunctivitis, we see the corneal involvement. To begin with, in the periphery, we see in the periphery of the cornea, a gray nodules can be seen. They will get ulcerated, they will form a yellowish ulcers. Okay, this is the typical presentation of a fluctular keratitis. Here you can make out there is a fluctus on the conjunctiva and also at the limbus. There is a what you call the ulcerous lesions because of the fluctular keratitis. Next, you have acne rosacea. Normally, it's seen in the elderly patients, elderly women. Normally, they will have this is followed. There will be something called mucopurulent conjunctivitis. Following it, the patient will develop again the similar kind of the infiltrates in the limbus, but they will get vascularized. Okay, if you look at this diagrams, you can make out here. Okay, patient, elderly women having especially vascularized infiltrates which are yellowish in color. How do you treat fluctular keratitis? Either topical antibiotics to prevent the secondary infections. Then we need to start the patient on steroids. Whenever the patient has a severe pain, better to start cycloplegics. Similarly, patient with the acne rosacea, the treatment protocol is the same. Only thing is you are going to add the patient on oral tetracycline because the patient has mucopurulent conjunctivitis. Okay, patient needs to be added on oral tetracycline. That you have to keep it in mind. Next, we have a marginal ulcer. These marginal ulcers are again it's an immune reaction to the toxins produced by the Staphylococcus, Varicella, or Haemophilus. Whenever any blood rate is due to these bacteria, the patient will develop marginal ulcers. Okay, or it can also be related to some of the autoimmune diseases like PAN, SLE, or vaginous granulomatous. They will cause the ring ulcers. How do they look? Look at this. The patients having, you can make out at the margin. See, if you just compare with this or this, okay, they will have very serious big ulcers, especially at the margins. and they will have an underlying cause. And why? Normally we see, suppose this is the eyeball, we see them exactly where the eyelid comes in contact with the eyeball. Okay, this is the position, here and here. Normally, these are the most common positions where the patient will develop the ulcer problem. So how do you treat these patients? We use, similar to the any other keratitis, you start the patient on antibiotics, steroid, topical cycloplegic, because these are all because immune mediated. You need to start the patient on steroids. That you have to keep it in mind. Okay. All four are immune mediated. You have to give the patients steroid, topical steroids, not like, and you should not give it in an infectious keratitis. Then, whenever the what you call the marginal ulcer is because of PAN or SLA or whatever, then patient needs to be started on oral cytotoxic drugs or steroids. Then you have something known as a Murin's ulcers or a rodent ulcer. So it's different from a marginal ulcer. See, this spreading is circumferential and axial. Okay. Suppose this is the cornea. Suppose this is the cornea. It spreads circumferentially like this. And suppose this is the cross-sectional view of the cornea. Okay. And it goes in anterior-posterior direction. It spreads deep into the cornea. So it means axially means the anterior-posterior spread of the disease. The cause is autoimmune, and if you look at the margins are overhanging, something like this. Suppose this is the cornea, this is the limbus, this is the limbus, this is the overhanging edge, this is the base of the ulcer. Okay. And normally, when you make the diagnosis of Murin's ulcers, it's a diagnosis of exclusion. That you have to keep it in mind. You rule out all the causes, you rule out these causes, then if you think this is not fit in this category, then it's a marginal ulcer. So how does it look? See, look at this. Definitely it's different from any other ulcers. Can you see here? This is marginal, what you call the Murin's ulcers, where there is, just like a rodent ulcer, there is undermining of the tissue and there will be overhanging. This is the overhanging edge. How do you treat? Because it's autoimmune mediated, so we are suspecting some sort of, the antibodies against the cornea as an antigen. So the best way to treat is excise the strip of conjunctiva nearby. Suppose if you have a marginal ulcer somewhere here, okay, then you excise this part of the conjunctiva here. Okay, here you excise and leave it so that there won't be any blood supply. Let it heal on its own. Okay, that is one technique. The second technique is, suppose if it ulcerates, then you can apply the tissue adhesive, or suppose then, because it's only lamellar involvement, just take out this part, then you apply the donor cornea, that is a lamellar keratoplasty. And because it's an autoimmune disease, you need to suppress the immunity by giving IV without Tepside. That you have to keep it in mind. So let's solve some of the questions. Steroids are contraindicated in, I think last time also we solved this question, but I told you in the, maybe in the next class we are going to discuss in brief what are the conditions we are going to give steroids and what are the conditions we are not going to give steroids. Okay, so who will answer this question? Steroids are contraindicated in vestibular conjunctivitis, granular conjunctivitis, Murin's ulcers and dendritic ulcers.
Dendritical.
See here, you have to remember this. Okay, little bit of doubt. Here definitely it's contraindicated 100%. Here Murin's ulcers, because of the autoimmune, why can't we use steroids? Okay, you can ask this question because the Murren's ulcer is an autoimmune disease or a disease of exclusion, but one of the hypothesis says it's an autoimmune disease. So, but
Yes, sir.
here, but research says that Murren's ulcers doesn't respond well to the steroids. So therefore, steroids have no role in Murren's ulcers. Okay. So a little bit of, if you read in brief, you'll understand. But definitely, if you compare, and also they say steroid can, aggravate the problem. So it should not be given. Some of the, but always you have to keep it in mind. The absolute contraindication is only in a dendritic ulcer.
Dendritic ulcer.
That we discussed in the last time. That
Yes, sir.
like in a herpes
Last class.
simplex, whenever there is a superficial infection, it should not be given. Only a stromal infection or infiltration, we give steroids. So the answer here is dendritic ulcer. Next, once we finish the immune-mediated corneal degenerations, we'll come to the next, that is the corneal dystrophies. Okay, the corneal, what are the corneal, if you take overall cornea, what are the pathologies of the abnormality of the cornea? One is a infectious diseases, then you have something of the immune-mediated corneal disorders, then you have a corneal dystrophies, you have then corneal degeneration, then you have corneal ectatic lesions. Okay, so we are into corneal dystrophy. This is followed by we have a ectatic cornea, corneal disorders. So corneal dystrophy is, I think, in the corneal dystrophy, I just went through the question paper. See, if you remember everything, it's well and good, because it's very difficult, very hard to remember everything. But there is a trick when you want to remember this stromal corneal dystrophy. This is very important. This has been asked many times. Okay, we will stress on this. So before this, at least to begin with, we should know what is corneal dystrophies. Corneal dystrophies are, it's a non-inflammatory and hereditary, bilateral in nature, a non-neovascularized corneal opacities. Okay, this is the definition. This you have to keep it in mind. It's purely, it's a genetical problem. Doesn't have any what you call the inflammation. It's a bilateral in nature. Doesn't have any systemic involvement. It's not neovascularized. It's just a deposition of the what you call the abnormal protein that is produced by the mutated genes. That you have to keep it in mind. So based on this, how to classify the corneal dystrophies? Corneal dystrophies can be divided into anatomy. One is epithelial or subepithelial dystrophies, Bowman's layer dystrophies, stromal dystrophies, that is very important and most commonly which is occurring, and you have an endothelial corneal dystrophy. This is also very important. Okay. So coming to epithelial or subepithelial dystrophies, if you take any epithelial or a subepithelial dystrophy, whether it's this or this or this, all three will cause are either asymptomatic or they will cause recurrent corneal erosions. And whenever there is a recurrent corneal erosion, they will have a pain, vesicornia, they will have a what you call the watering, excessive watering, they can have a blood vision. So epithelial basement membrane dystrophies are categorized as either epithelial basement membrane dystrophy, also known as, other alternative names are MAP dot fingerprint dystrophy or Cogan microcystic epithelial dystrophy, anterior basement membrane dystrophy. These are the other alternate names. You go back once the class is finished, you go back, you make your own mnemonics, how to just to remember. You have to remember, that's all, because it's very difficult to make you understand. If you want me to make you understand, we need to go in depth. It's very difficult, and this will be out of this scope of this class discussion. Very difficult, but see, as the name suggests, it's a map dot. They will have a geographic pattern, or they will have a like a fingerprint. What do you call? They will have an appearance. So that's why it's called map dot fingerprint dystrophy. Other than this, Cogan's microcystic epithelial dystrophy. That you have to keep it in mind. Next, you have Meesmann corneal dystrophy. How it looks? Suppose this is the cornea. Okay, it involves, we know it involves only the epithelium. In the epithelium, because of the genetic mutation, they will start accumulating abnormal protein. They will form like a cyst. When they look from the anterior side, they will look multiple cysts. Okay. The other name is juvenile hereditary epithelial dystrophy. This Meesmann corneal dystrophies will have a multiple epithelial cyst. This is the appearance. You have the other one is a gelatinous drop-like corneal dystrophy, also known as it's a localized form of amyloidosis. Among the dystrophies, there are two forms of amyloidosis. One is a gelatinous drop-like corneal dystrophy. The other form is the lattice dystrophy. Okay, these are the two forms, what you call localized form of amyloidosis. Other names are subepithelial amyloidosis, primary familial amyloidosis, or Grayson's dystrophies. You have Bowman's layer dystrophy. Bowman's dystrophies are either, there are two types, major types, and most commonly occurring one. One is the Thiel-Behnke's corneal dystrophy or Rees-Buckler's corneal dystrophies. These are the other names for these dystrophies. Suppose you have a Thiel-Behnke's corneal dystrophy, is also known as a corneal dystrophy of Bowman's layer type 2 or anti-limiting membrane dystrophy type 2. Similarly, for a Rees-Buckler's corneal dystrophy is known as a corneal dystrophy of a Bowman's membrane type 1 or anti-limiting membrane corneal dystrophy type 1, or you have also known as a superficial granular dystrophies, okay, or granular corneal dystrophy type 3. Go back and read, okay. If you read, you will remember. Here you have, this is also known as a granular dystrophy type 3, okay. This is the Bowman's corneal dystrophy. Here you have what you call the granular dystrophy type 1 and type 2 of a stromal dystrophy. Okay, type 1 and type 2 granular dystrophy is a stromal dystrophy. Type 3 is a Bowman's membrane corneal dystrophy. Okay, remember these points. And both Bowman's, like what is the difference between these two? See, the Thiel-Behnke's corneal dystrophy has a honeycomb pattern or reticular pattern. Okay, on the cornea you have a honeycomb pattern like this, hexagonal pattern. Just like endothelium, you can make out they will have a hexagonal pattern. But the Rees-Buckler's, you have something known as, it's like a geographical ulcer. Okay, but it's an opacity just beneath the epithelium. So both Bowman's layer dystrophies are autosomal dominant. They start in the childhood and they will cause recurrent corneal erosions and they will have a loss of vision. Normally it's because of a hyaline deposits of protein in the Bowman's membrane, and they will stay with the massive trichrome, they will stay in red. How do you treat these cases? Because it is superficial. If you look at epithelium and the Bowman's membrane, these are the superficial layers of the cornea. Either we surgically remove that by a blunt dissection, or in the latest technology we can use laser. Okay, laser in the form of what you call the ablation. We phototherapeutic keratectomy. Using a laser, we ablate or burn the surface, that is known as a phototherapeutic keratectomy. Okay, photo means laser, therapeutic, it's basically the treatment. Okay, keratectomy. We are doing using a laser, we are taking out the cornea. We have, this is followed by stromal corneal dystrophy. This is the most commonest one and most frequently asked. And it's very easy to remember. See, you start it's from alphabetical order, granular, then you have a lattice, you have a macular corneal dystrophy. Okay, what is the mode of inheritance? It's autosomal dominant, and autosomal recessive. Okay, very easy to remember because the question has been asked regarding this. You start like this alphabetical order, first granular, lattice, macular. Similarly, alphabetical order, autosomal recessive will be the last one. Okay, hopefully you can remember like this. Then what is the mode of onset? Usually it's seen in adolescent age. Lattice and the macular dystrophies are seen in the first decade. What are the symptoms? If you look at the diagram, you'll understand what are the symptoms exactly. Look at this. This is a granular dystrophy. Then you have a lattice. Then you have a macular dystrophy. Granular dystrophy, you have like a breadcrumb appearance. The lesions are like a breadcrumb or a snowflake appearance. And in between the interface, what we call the between the lesions, the cornea is clear. Okay, because the cornea is clear, they will have a good vision. They will have a decent vision in comparison to lattice or a macular dystrophy. And usually it's concentrated in the center of the cornea. And the periphery is pale, we can make out here. But look at the lattice degeneration. Lattice degeneration, you have a crisscross bifurcating lines like this, and usually the what called the interface, we call it as the interface haze will be present here. They will have a poor vision because there are you don't see any interface what you call the clear area. Because of that, you see a poor vision. Similarly, look at this, the macular dystrophy. This lattice is because of amyloid deposit. Granular is because of a hyaline deposit. Macular is because of what you call the glycosaminoglycans deposit. Mucopolysaccharides deposits. And they will have ground glass appearance normally. Look at this, between the deposits, cornea is not so clear. They will have a very poor vision. Okay, look here. Vision in a granular dystrophy will be very good, and here it's poor, very good. Similarly, only a central part of the cornea is involved, whereas the lattice and the macular dystrophy, the whole cornea is involved. Here you will have a hyaline deposits in a granular dystrophy. You will have amyloid deposits in a lattice degeneration. Mucopolysaccharides deposits in the case of macular dystrophy. And I told you also what is the appearance. They will have a snowflake or a breadcrumb appearance. They will have a lattice will have a bifurcating crisscross lines. The macular dystrophy will have a ground glass appearance. Then we have the endothelial dystrophy. The endothelial, what you call endothelial dystrophies are 4 types. The major ones, there are so many major ones. Out of these, the most important ones are CHCD and endothelial dystrophy of Fuchs. CHCD occurs in a newborn babies. It's a congenital endothelial dystrophy which causes the corneal edema by birth. We see in birth, but the endothelial dystrophies of the Fuchs, it's seen in an elderly patient. Okay. And for us, the important one is the Fuchs endothelial dystrophy. What is the presentation? It's seen in elderly patient, most commonly affects the females. And in the beginning of the part 1 cornea, I told you, on the cornea you have a descemet membrane. On the descemet membrane, you have a wart-like excretions. Okay, these excretions will push the endothelium and that will damage the endothelium, resulting in death of the endothelium. Whenever there is a death of the endothelium, the remaining endothelial cells are not enough to keep the cornea dehydrated state. So therefore the cornea will develop corneal edema. Whenever there is a corneal edema, patient will develop corneal bullae. Okay, bullae are nothing but the collection of fluid because of the fluid which comes from posterior side. Anterior, when it comes near the epithelial cells, that will form the vesicles. And when the edema damages the lamellae, that causes the stromal opacity, especially because in the morning time the eyelids are closed and normally the tear will evaporate. When the eyes are closed, the tear, what you call the corneal edema doesn't evaporate. So the patient in the morning time will have a morning halos. Because of the structure of the cornea, patient will have a pain and they will have a blurred vision. So how do you treat? In the initial phase, because the cornea is edematous, we want to suck the water out of the cornea. We use hypertonic saline, that is sodium chloride 5% eye drop or an ointment 6%. We use it so that this hypertonic solutions will drag the water out of the cornea. Whenever in a what I call the end stage, when the cornea is damaged and are not responding to medication, then we do what is known as penetrating keratoplasty. Penetrating keratoplasty, either it's a full thickness penetrating keratoplasty, or suppose only the endothelium is damaged, what we do is we take out only the diseased part of the cornea, then we replace with a healthy donor endothelial layer, that is Descemet stripping automated endothelial keratoplasty, DSEK. The full form of DSEK is Descemet stripping automated endothelial keratoplasty. So some of the questions related to the corneal dystrophies. This was asked in 2013. Corneal dystrophy, what is true? It's an inflammatory neovascularization, bilateral condition, or all of the above. What is the answer? Anybody? Anybody?
Bilateral.
Yeah, very good. It's a bilateral. Okay. So we discussed it in the previous slides. Corneal dystrophies are a non-inflammatory, non-neovascularization. It's a bilateral condition. It's a hereditary. So here the answer is bilateral. Corneal dystrophies are primary and unilateral. Second option is primary bilateral. Primary bilateral with systemic disease. Primary unilateral without systemic disease. What is the answer? Definitely it's not primary unilateral. Primary bilateral, yes, possibility. Primary bilateral with systemic disease, no. Primary unilateral, it's ruled out. The only option is primary bilateral. Which of the following is the least common corneal dystrophies? I told you, right? If you go from alphabetical order, easy to remember. Granular, you have lattice and a macular. The most common one is granular. Okay? That is a simple way to remember. At least from your perspective, definitely, if you want to remember, this is the simple way. Autosomal, it's an autosomal dominant type. Again, autosomal dominant, it's an autosomal recessive type. Most common type, least common type. Vision is very good here. Okay. Vision is poor here. This is how you can remember, at least from your side. So the option here is the granular corneal dystrophy. Who will answer this question? Corneal dystrophies are macular, granular, lattice, Murans and Fuchs. What is the answer?
Except
Louder.
All except D.
See, no. See, the question is PJ. In the bottom, I have mentioned, right, when it was asked, in which paper it was asked. Okay, just this you have to keep it in mind. Which are the corneal dystrophies? It's not accept. Who will answer? See, macular definitely. Granular, yes. Platis, yes. What about Moorens? Moorens is a dystrophy?
Immune mediated.
Yes.
Immune
Yes,
mediated.
very good. Very good. Excellent. So, the fuse. The only option, except for D, all the options are correct. Okay. Which of the following stromal dystrophy is a recessive condition? Again, this we have discussed. Okay, easy to remember. Who will answer?
Macular.
Yeah, good. Macular is an autosomal recessive. See, again, I think I didn't mention regarding the flex dystrophy. This is a very uncommon stromal dystrophy. This is an autosomal dominant variety. Okay, go back and read about flex dystrophy. Flex dystrophies are a stromal dystrophies. You will see like the dystrophies where the deposits will be like a dandruff type. It's an autosomal dominant variety. Again, the vision will be poorly affected in this condition. Recurrent corneal erosion is seen in corneal dystrophies, keratoconus, keratoglobus, Peutz anomaly. Just now we discussed corneal dystrophies 100% we will cover because it's a age question. Okay, we expect only one answer. Corneal dystrophies, we know, we discussed because of the deposits that will over a period of time, because of the instability of the corneal epithelium, they will breach, they will form the epithelial defect. So that will give rise to lacrimation, pain, whatever. Keratoconus and keratoglobus are ectatic conditions. You don't see any what you call the erosions of the cornea. Peutz anomaly, I searched in the literature, I didn't find anywhere which related to the ocular anomaly. Or could be, just a spelling mistake sometimes if you copy the question. Sometimes you will have the kind of, problem. Coming to the degenerative, again, you have 6 types of degeneration. If you look at the diagram, easy to remember, this is the 6 most common type and frequently asked in the exams, and you should know. To begin with, you have arcus finalis, arcus juvenalis, Terrier's marginal degeneration, band-shaped keratopathy, climatic droplet keratopathy, Salzmann's nodular degeneration. Out of all the degeneration, arcus juvenalis is the only degeneration which occurs in less than 40 years of age. Rest of the degenerations occurs in elderly patients. That you have to keep it in mind. The name itself suggests it's a juvenalis, so it will occur in less than 40 years of age. So how do you differentiate between we'll go by 2 at a time so that you can compare and you can remember. See, this is a arcus finalis, this is a arcus juvenalis. So if you look at the diagram, again they have the same presentation, no change. Okay, both are same, no difference. Only thing is, if you ask the patient's age, you will be less than 40 years, and if you take the history or you look at the patient, you will be more than 60 plus. Okay, and you will have these deposits here. It's a crescentic and concentric in nature, and if you look at the diagram, see, it starts at the center and it starts spreading towards it spreads the arm, and they will join over a period of time, they will join, and they never produce any what you call the blurring of the vision. They will be in the periphery and they are asymptomatic, especially in the arcus finalis. And they don't have, they will normally, the serum cholesterol levels will be within the normal limits in these patients. Arcus senalis is an age-related problem. Senalis. Senalis means it's the age, old age. Senalis. Senile cataract. Senile cataract means it's the age-related old age cataract. Similarly, you have an arcus juvenalis. The only differentiating point is this occurs in less than 40 years of age. This occurs in more than 60 years of age. And they have the same presentation. And in these patients, arcus juvenalis, you have to check for the serum cholesterol level because they will have an elevated serum cholesterol level, because of which this cholesterol, arcus senalis and arcus juvenalis are nothing but it's a what you call the lipid deposits in the cornea. In the corneal stroma, there will be lipid deposits, and both are asymptomatic. Arcus senalis is asymptomatic, and the arcus juvenalis it's purely because of the elevated serum cholesterol level. Then you have a Terrier's marginal degeneration and a band-shaped keratopathy. If you look at this diagram, this occurs in the superior cornea and in the margin of at the junction of the limbus of the cornea, where the cornea becomes thin, and this thin cornea will have a vascularization. They will have a vascularization, pannus formation. If you read the book, the pannus formation, they will have a thinning of and they will have a lipid deposits. And doesn't cause any what you call the visual symptoms except for they will have myopic shift. This is a band-shaped keratopathy. This is the fourth variety of what you call the degenerative disease. This band-shaped keratopathy is due to what you call the deposition of the calcium. Calcium which get deposited on the epithelium and the subepithelium. Normally, it's seen in cases with chronic uveitis or any intraocular surgeries like vitrectomies or aphakias or typical eyeballs, okay, or blind eyes, you see this kind of problem, or systemic problems like hypoparathyroidism or vitamin D poisoning. And normally you see in the interpalpable area. And how do you treat these cases? Because it's a calcium deposits, we use something known as a calcium chelating agent. Okay, we either, if it is superficial, we use surgically, you can just scrape it off. If it's very deep, it's very difficult to just scrape with the surgical instrument, or it's going to cause any damage to the cornea. Use anti-chelating agents, that is EDTA or sodium EDTA can be used. That is the second option. Third option, if it is less superficial, it's not so deep, you can use PTK, that is a phototherapeutic keratectomy. That is a laser guided corneal what you call the ablation. Ablation is nothing but you are taking out, burning. Ablation is burning the layer of the cornea. Then you have the fifth one, that is a climatic droplet keratopathy or actinic droplet keratopathy. These things you see in a hot, humid, dry conditions, elderly patients who have a poor hygiene. And usually when you look at the cornea, you will see like oil droplet-like deposits on the cornea. Okay, these are basically actinic deposits. This will cause the blurred vision. And how do you treat? Because it's a deep, we do lamellar keratoplasty. Because it's deep, irregular surface, we take out the part of the cornea, then we replace it with the same part from the donor's cornea. Then you have something known as the Salzmann's nodular degeneration. These are bluish white avascular nodules on the cornea. Normally we see whenever any surgeries, any previous corneal surgeries or contact lens wearers, we see this kind of lesion. And how to treat? Again, it's a lamellar keratoplasty. You need to take out these parts and you put the healthy donor cornea. So let's solve some of the questions. Band-shaped keratopathy is caused by amyloid deposits, calcium deposits, monopolysaccharides, lipid, iron or melanin deposits. This was asked, I think, 3 times. Age 2006, 13. Yeah, just now we discussed it's a calcium.
Calcium.
Go back and read, you will remember everything. It's a calcium deposits. Amyloid you see in the case of amyloid deposits, you will see in the case of dystrophies. Okay, we saw in stromal you have a lattice dystrophy. There you see amyloid deposits, and also in a Bowman's membrane dystrophy. Okay, just to as a reminder. Next, polysaccharides is deposited in macular dystrophies, and iron, lipid, melanin, these things will be deposited in various other conditions. Which of the following is seen in sarcoidosis? Sarcoidosis again is a chronic, causes the uveitis. Basically, the sarcoidosis causes the uveitis. I told you, right? The chronic uveitis will cause a band-shaped keratopathy. So the answer is band-shaped keratopathy. Sarcoidosis causes the panuveitis. I think in 2009, when I was preparing for my exam, they asked this question. I think sarcoidosis causes what type of uveitis, whether it is anterior uveitis, posterior uveitis, intermediate uveitis, or a panuveitis. Okay, the answer is panuveitis. Whenever there is a chronic uveitis, that will cause band-shaped keratopathy. Angioid streaks, choroid plaques, cataract nigra, these are all not seen in the case of what you call sarcoidosis. Coming to the last topic, that is the ectatic conditions of the cornea. So here we have, there are so many ectatic conditions, but you have to remember 3 main important types, that is keratoconus, keratoglobus, pellucid marginal degeneration. Okay, this pellucid marginal degeneration you need to differentiate from a Terrien's marginal degeneration. That you have to keep it in mind. If you look in general, ectatic conditions of the cornea are, it's a non-inflammatory in origin. It's basically due to congenital weakness of the cornea. Keratoconus in specific due to trauma, VKC. What is VKC? Vernal keratoconjunctivitis, where the it's basically allergic conditions where the kids or whoever, they will have a tendency to rub their eyes whenever there is a rubbing of the cornea. That will cause a microtrauma to the cornea. Because of the trauma, that can induce the ectatic lesions of the cornea. You also see in a case of Down syndrome, and also the other conditions are where there is a genetic collagen mutation like Marfan syndrome, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Okay, these are all the important syndromes where you will see the cornea becomes thin and ectatic. That you have to, and also there is a Leber's congenital amaurosis, LCA. We call it as a Leber's congenital amaurosis, where these patients will have a repeated corneal rubbing. This will cause a what you call the keratoconus. How the keratoconus looks? See, if you look into this, normally the cornea becomes thin in the center, just below the center, and below the center that will bulge out. Okay, this is the case of keratoconus. Conical shape of the cornea. This is a Munson sign. What is Munson sign? When a patient looks down, the conical protrusion of the lower eyelid is known as the Munson sign. Then you have a hydrops formation. Hydrops. This is the hydrops. What is hydrops? Whenever there is a thinning of the cornea, okay, when the cornea becomes thin, it cannot withstand the normal intraocular pressure. So the descent will rupture. Because of the rupture of the descent, the cornea will develop the corneal edema and the patient will have an acute pain. This is known as an acute eye drops. Then this is an oil droplet sign. What is oil droplet sign? With the direct ophthalmoscope, when you look into the fundus, you see what you call the red glow in the background. In the center, in the front, you see a dark spot. That is because of the total internal reflection of the cornea, because of the deep abnormal cornea here, where there is a keratoconus, you'll have what you call the dark reflex against the fundal glow. Then, if you do a corneal topography, okay, normally if you do a corneal topography, these are nothing but the Meyers. We call it as a Meyers. Meyers. These are concentric and they are regular. But in a case of keratoconus, look at this. The Meyers are irregular. Okay, they are irregular in shape. This is one more evident that the patient has a keratoconus. This is a Redutis sign. What is Redutis sign? When you throw a light from the temporal aspect, okay, you can make out the conical shape of the cornea on the nasal side. Okay, this is known as a Redutis sign. Then you have something known as Fleischer. What is a Fleischer ring? Okay, you should know here at the base of the cornea, you can make out at the base of the what you call the cone, keratoconus, there will be a deposit of what you call the iron. This is known as the Fleischer ring. Then you have, because the cornea has become thin, you can see here these are the descent folds. You can see here a kind of wrinkles. This is known as a Vogt-Stray. This is the other conditions. Okay. This is the keratoglobus. You can make out the eyeball will become like a hemispherical, totally bulged out. But if you look into the anterior segment, everything will be normal except for total bulging. It's a bilateral condition. It's a familial and hereditary in nature and doesn't cause any harm except for the refractive error. They will have a myopic shift because of it's a total bulging of the cornea out. Then you have this is a pellucid marginal degeneration. What is this pellucid marginal degeneration? Okay, in the what you call just below the center in the periphery, you will see there is a thinning here. You can see here there is a thinning of the cornea. Okay, this thinning. Again, see if you compare with the teres marginal degeneration, there is no lipid deposition, no vascularization, nothing. Everything will be intact here. But if you look at this, okay, did you see here what you call teres marginal degeneration? There is, look at this, okay. This is how you differentiate. This is more in the superior part. But the pellucid marginal degeneration will be in the inferior part. Okay. So coming to little bit about some of the iron and the copper deposits on the cornea. This is very interesting. You should know these things. What are the different rings and lines in the cornea? Okay. You have a Stocker's line. What is Stocker's line? Whenever there is a progressive pterygium, that will damage the Bowman's membrane and the epithelium. Whenever there is a damage to the Bowman's membrane and the epithelium, the iron content of the tear will get deposited. That will form a brownish, golden brown color line around the head of the pterygium known as a Stocker's line. Then you have a Kayser-Fleischer ring that is seen in a Wilson's disease. You have a Fleischer ring. This is again, do not get confused with K ring from a Fleischer ring. As already discussed, this will be seen at the base of the the keratoconus, where there will be iron deposit. This is because of the iron deposit. This is because of copper deposit. This is again because of iron deposit. Then you have something known as a Hudson-Stalin line. What is this Hudson-Stalin line? This is seen in a normal people, elderly people. When see normally, if you look into the eyelids, they meet at like this. Okay, exactly at the junction of upper 2/3 and lower 1/3. This is the junction where they meet. So whenever they sleep during the night time, when the eyelids are closed, because of the fluid which get entrapped between the eyelids, the iron content from this tear meniscus will get deposited on the cornea. They will form the line like this. This is known as a Hudson-Stalin line. Okay. So what is the treatment for this? Another 2 more slides. How do you treat keratoconus? Spectacles. In the early treatment of spectacles, then the contact lens, if the patient is not able to use glasses, we can give the spectacles or a contact lens. Then the most hot favorite topic, that is the corneal collagen cross-linking, that is the C3R. What is the C3R? We use a solution called a riboflavin. Along with that, we use the radiation of UVA radiation. With this, we try to form a strong bond between the lamellae. If it doesn't work, then think of going for a corneal transplantation. Specifically, if a cornea is not so damaged, we do deep anterior lamellar keratoplasty. We other option is cerebral Your case idea? Hello? I think sorry for the delay. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Hello. Yeah.
Ha,
Okay.
sir.
Sorry. Sorry. Sorry for interruption. Another, I think, another, I think, 5 slides. So the intax is nothing but a corneal rings. Suppose this is the cross section of the cornea where you have what you call keratoconus. You place the rings inside like this. From anteriorly, suppose this is the keratoconus. We place the ring like this. Okay, that will stabilize the keratoconus part of the cornea, and the progression can be halted. This is the another options for the keratoconus treatment. So we will answer some of the questions. True about the keratoconus is astigmatism, Fleischer ring, Munson sign. The second option is central corneal thinning with distorted corneal reflex, protrusion of the anterior cornea, D, protrusion of the posterior cornea and thick cornea, increased curvature, hypermetropia and soft lens use. So what are the options here? This was asked in 3 times in PGI Chandigarh. So the first option is correct. Astigmatism, Fleischer ring, Munson sign. Anybody? Then you have a central corneal thinning with a distorted cornea. That is also correct answer. Then you have a protrusion of the anterior cornea. That is also correct answer. But you don't see a thick cornea here. Okay, here they have mentioned. That is a wrong answer. Though there is increased curvature, but it's not a hypermetropia, but it's a what you call the myopic. It's not the hypermetropic. Soft lenses are used. Keratoconus is associated with Marfan's, yes. Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, correct. Usher syndrome, this is Usher syndrome. We don't see any corneal involvement, and normally this is because of retinitis RP, retinitis pigmentosa, and they will have what you call the deafness. Okay, this is also known as a deaf blindness syndrome. Then you have a Down syndrome that already we have discussed. So this was asked in 2012 PGI Chandigarh. Options are A, B and D. Munson sign is seen in keratoconus, keratoglobus, keratomalacia and all of this. What is the answer? We don't see in the case of keratoglobus.
Keratoconus.
So keratoconus is the only conditions. You know, globus doesn't produce. Munson sign is because of a conical shape. Okay. Conical protrusion, outward protrusion of the lower eyelid. So the keratoconus is the only option. Keratoglobus, we don't see any Munson sign. Keratomalacia is not a condition which produces. Keratomalacia again, it's a ectatic condition, but again it doesn't have a conical shape. Okay, and the fourth option is all of this. So this is also a wrong answer. The only option is A answer. The last question, treatment or option for keratoconus includes spectacles, contact lens, keratoplasty, LASIK, IOL and steroids. This question was asked in PG 2009 and 2008. What is the answer? Anybody?
A. Spectacles, contact lens.
Very good. And keratoplasty. Okay. Keratoplasty, penetrating keratoplasty. But you have to remember, LASIK is not, it's a contraindication in the case of keratoconus. That you have to keep it in mind. One of the contraindication for LASIK is the presence of keratoconus. And there is no role of IOL. IOL is nothing but an intraocular lens, and steroids. Steroid doesn't have any role here. Once there is a whenever there is a vernal keratoconjunctivitis, when you give steroids, that will reduce the frequency of rubbing the eyes, but not in the case of keratoconus. It's not going to reverse the pathology. And intraocular lenses doesn't have any role in the case of keratoconus. So this is also ruled out. So these D and E are ruled out. The only options are spectacles, contact lens, and keratoplasty are the treatment option in the case of keratoconus. Okay. With this, we conclude our talk. I think one more. Sorry, one more question. This is the last question. To prevent the keratoconus, what is used? Antibiotics, cycloplegics. You use glasses or none? What is the answer?
Glasses.
Read the question properly. It's prevention, not the treatment. So you should not be so hurried. Okay. The question is to prevent the keratoconus. With the antibiotic, is it possible to prevent the keratoconus? No. With the cycloplegics, doesn't have any role. Glasses, it doesn't have any role.
None.
None is the only
None.
option. Okay. None is the only option. With the glasses, how you are going to prevent the keratoconus? Tell me. Okay. See, keratoconus can be prevented. Suppose if you have a patient having trauma due to frequent rubbing. Just prevent the frequent rubbing by treating the underlying cause. For example, if you have vernal keratoconjunctivitis, you ask the patient to stop rubbing the eyes, and for the VKC, you start the patient on steroids and what you call the relevant drugs. Very simple. So that the frequency of what you call the rubbing will be reduced. That's how you can prevent the keratoconus. But in a case of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, Down syndrome, Marfan syndrome, or mitral valve prolapse patients, that is also one of the important association with the keratoconus. In these patients, we can't do anything much. So that is a non-preventable, but trauma is a preventable. So trauma is the only thing which can be prevented. Antibiotics, cycloplegic, glasses doesn't have any role at all. So the only option is none. None is the answer here. Okay. If you have any doubts, let me know. With this, we conclude almost 95% of the cornea. Maybe I think one or two topics are left. Maybe in some other class where we have a shorter topics or a small topics. Along with that, I will try to cover the rest of the cornea. Okay. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, sir.